Today on Thursday, January 16th at 3:45 PM as announced. We'll do roll call.
President Beitman,
Excused?
Senator Guru,
Here.
Senator Nethercott,
Here?
Senator Rothfuss,
Here.
Vice President Salazar.
Here.
And members of the public and LSO that might be interested. We haven't had a good opportunity to review some of these proposed rules in a way that we feel confident to take action on them today. So we don't anticipate taking any formal action on them today. We will do that tomorrow, but we will learn about the rules, so we'll be prepared to take that action tomorrow. So we'll take testimony and walk through some of these rules and then take action tomorrow. They have to be adopted by the Senate on Monday. So it appears to be, there's enough time for us to do that and feel confident that we've thoughtfully reviewed these proposed changes. So with that, Director?
Yep, and Madam Chairman, I think what you could do is, if you want to get a little baseline knowledge on these today, then you're having the joint rules meeting upon adjournment tomorrow, and maybe if you wanted to meet again after that, or Monday too, over the noon recess, but if you don't have meetings. But they just need to be numbered before, I'm guessing you're going to take up the rules, the permanent rules of the 68th on Monday afternoon. So any of those times would be just fine. And we don't have these numbered, so they're kind of hard to differentiate which is which. I had a hard time yesterday trying to explain them in front of the House Rules Committee. But the first one to take up is the first rule that's being amended is Senate Rule 15-7. And this is just a cleanup rule. As you can see in 15-7, there's simply a typo in the, of the or. And then it repeals 18-1. And 18-1 were rules for the 2022 budget session that came in late with COVID and the rules that needed to be adopted for that. And so it's been fully executed by its terms. It only applied to the 2022 budget session. So just repealing that rule.
From the committee on these proposed changes for 15-7 and 18-1, Senator Rothfuss?
Madam Chairman, these came through technology process also, and these are basically the reviser's rules bill.
Yeah. Any further questions? All right, seeing none, Director?
Madam Chairman, the other one that came through tech and process is creating Senate Rule 11-7, requesting a bill with amendments incorporated. And this is what we colloquially refer to as enrolling a bill. It's when a bill becomes so heavily amended on committee of the whole or second reading that it cannot reasonably be understood unless you create a version of the bill where all the amendments are tracked into that bill. This was from Tech and Process and then forwarded on by Management Council. It's not the official version of the bill, and the full Senate would need to vote to ask for this. We have done this previously, LSO has. It's extremely rare for us to do this until you get to a conference committee, right? And then we take the enrolled version of the bill and we enroll all of the amendments that were passed in the second house for that conference committee to be able to refer back to. We always do that, but we don't do this for a bill between committee of the whole and second reading or second and third reading. Tech and Process thought that could be helpful. Well, I worry about potential confusion because you're not going to make the amendments to the line numbers in this tracked changes bill. It will have a disclaimer on the top. Anyways, Madam Chairman, that is the that's the amendment there.
Senator Guru.
Just a question. Was there any discussion about how to how you would quantify so heavily amended?
Director?
I mean, it may be different in the eyes of the beholder. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Chairman, Senator Grew, yes, there certainly was in tech and process. What is that? How do you quantify it? Is it a number of amendments? Is it, per word? And what they came up with is that the bill could no longer reasonably be understood. So that's the standard.
Senator Rothfuss?
Thanks, Madam Chairman. Yeah, in the discussion on technology and process, right, there was a desire to have everybody just be able to do this because it's handy. And that would obviously be a train wreck where our staff time would be spent doing nothing other than amending in language and doing it upon request. So the discussion was, all right, well, how do we put a check in place that's a fair check where everybody has access, but there's a high barrier, and this is the language that was resulted. So you need to basically set a standard, and the standard is up to the interpretation of the Senate. So it no longer reasonably be understood, whatever that means, but it's the Senate's decision by an affirmative motion that the Senate is willing to effectively commit staff time to doing it for the good of the Senate. And that was what we came up with.
And now, just, I'm adding to the discussion here, Senator Rothfuss, who's on the committee, and the director, there's nothing that prohibits a legislator, though, from asking for this to be done and then handing it out as a handout. And so this authority doesn't restrict its ability, in fact, probably invites it.
Madam Chairman, and Director Obrecht can provide some details, but we don't respond with a yes. Typically, when that's being done, it's often being done by members unless there is some sufficient need and there's bandwidth by our staff to do it. So if you went and asked and said, hey, I've got this really complicated bill, dear staff, will you please do this for us? I mean, it's possible you could get an eventually as a response, but they can't prioritize it because it's just too much work. So this is trying to give an avenue, and I'd let the director kind of provide some detail about that.
Director, do you need sidebars for the Senate?
Madam Chairman, that's exactly right, is that we will usually push back on that sort of request from an individual member. If it came from the president, it would be different. But if it was just an individual member that said, hey, my bill's been so heavily amended now that it can't be understood, we would say we really don't have, that's not a core function of of the Legislative Service Office during the session, to provide that type of document during the session. We would, so you could get the president to ask us to do that, and if the president felt like it was important enough, we'd do it, but we would not generally do that for an individual legislator because of the fear that then every individual legislator would be like, oh, you can't understand my bill anymore, so here LSO produced this version of it for you, so now you can understand it. And it's not just staff time either. It really is. There's a huge possibility of misunderstanding on the floor. If you start producing an enrolled version or an amendment or a version with all the amendments tracked in, page and line numbers will get thrown off. And that's how we then relate back to a bill on third reading amendments. And so somebody will have a tracked in version. They'll be like, well, wait, I'm not following here now on these new amendments. Now, I didn't sell it this hard to the House. I really didn't. I mean, I don't think that this is like going to be a nail in the coffin for how we do business around here if we pass this rule. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it will be clearly that if somebody comes in and asks Ian for this sort of thing now, he can go, well, go look at 11.7. You need the full Senate to vote on this and okay it now. And at least, it provides an avenue for somebody to do that. And then the body can keep track then. Hey, we've asked for this twice this year. Do we really need it on this bill? I think that reasonably you can understand it. So, I mean, I think we can work with this language in a lot of different ways. It's just that the Senate will need to be aware that, hey, if we start asking for this on every other bill, Ian's going to tell the president, hey, please, realize what this is doing to our ability to draft bills and produce other amendments.
Any further questions, comments? Okay.
All right, I'm going to go with one more, and then I think Senator Larson and I will walk through a bill or a amendment. This one has come up today. It is an amendment to create Senate Rule 15-8, and that is to restrict the video and audio recording of private conversations. This is loosely based on a proposed House amendment that Representative Lawley brought to the House Rules Committee yesterday that they voted not to sponsor, and I don't know if Representative Lawley will bring it back on the floor of the House or not, but it says legislators have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their private communications, including but not limited to communications with constituents. No legislator, legislative staff member, or guest shall use audio or video recording equipment to record the private communication of a legislator conducted on the floor of the Senate or any parts of the Capitol and its passages, or at any place in which the legislature is conducting legislative business without the consent of all parties to the communication. We also included some potential alternative language for you to consider there. Instead of that last phrase, or any place in which the legislator is conducting business, or at any place in which the legislator is conducting legislative business. A lot of this language after floor of the Senate, where it says, or any part, that mirrors language in 28.8, I think 103, about where the president has authority to regulate conduct in the statutes, 28.8, 103, I believe. So,
Just on that, in its original form there, what's shown in lines 12 through 14,
yes.
but so not the alternative
Madam
language?
Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, yes.
Okay, thank you.
The original form, but Ian and I thought that you should see that alternative language if you wanted to expand it to other areas as well.
Further discussion? Director, what are your thoughts about the term "or guest"?
Madam Chairman, what I wanted to say about that is that is language that Tamara found where or who may be allowed into the Senate break room. It's the legislative staff member or guest. So that is the language that she mirrored. We could and also who can be on the floor. No one can just walk onto the floor during a session. Even when you're not in session, it has to be a staff member, a senator, or a guest of a senator. So that's why we've used that language. And this really doesn't pertain to the galleries. Now, we could make that determination, but it's really more about what is going on the floor or in a committee meeting. And obviously in a committee meeting, there's members of the public, there's other people who may be, have the potential to record private communication. So it could be expanded. That's the only reason, that's why. It was Tamara's fault.
Senator Rothfuss?
Just in terms of what this does, getting to the committee meeting, I mean, it's a little clearer to me when you're in the Senate, but in a committee meeting, you've got a member of the public in the audience of the committee, and they're taking video of the proceeding. Obviously, that it applies from the standpoint of a legislator conducting legislative business where they're supposed to, but there wouldn't be permission. Do you read this as precluding that?
Private communications.
Mr. Chairman, or I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I guess what I would say is the whole thing here is that these are private communications. So if somebody is filming at a committee meeting and you and I are conversing in such a way that it can be heard on a normal audio, I don't think that's a private communication at that point in time. But if I'm whispering to you and Senator Guru is taping our conversation, and we expect that, we have an expectation of privacy in our whispered conversation, even in a public meeting, then that is the sort of recording that this is trying to get at. And whether this is the exact language to do it or not,
Gotcha.
we can certainly work it.
That's helpful, though, thank you.
All right, moving on.
Okay, and then the last amendment for your consideration is an amendment that really stems from a bill that has been introduced before the House right now. It's House Bill 158. And what it does is creates an electronic push-button voting system for both the House and the Senate. And then it requires, or the bill doesn't, but the bill provides an appropriation to install that push-button voting system in both the House and the Senate. And then these rules correspond to the rule changes that would be necessary in the Senate and joint rules if that push-button electronic voting system in House Bill 158 was adopted. And then Senator Larson is a co-sponsor on that bill and wanted to present these rules to you for discussion if that bill is adopted and enrolled into law. And I will just say, if we skip ahead to Section 5, these rules are contingent on their effectiveness on that bill being enacted into law. And then also an actual push-button electronic voting system being installed and operational before the start of the 2026 session as well. And I can walk through it quickly.
Just a quick question. I got the email from someone today that our votes we can go watch the votes currently. I didn't have time to go do that. But can we discuss what we're currently doing for the reflection of live votes currently happening in real time and being able to hold everybody accountable versus this other version?
Yep. So, Madam Chairman, currently, when you take a roll call vote on any motion, and this was, again, at the request of the Select Committee on Tech and Process, and then affirmed by Management Council, that LSO, in conjunction with our LMS, which is our legislative management system, our consultant, the architect of that system, developed an add-on so that when the Senate or the House both have a roll call vote, we have a web page set up, and there's a link to it on the daily calendar for the House and the Senate. And you click on that link, and then for the Senate, it will list the motion, say, Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 5, and then it will list all 31 senators. And as that vote is happening, as Ellen, the chief clerk, is entering the vote, if Senator Nethercott is an aye, if you vote aye through the roll call system, Ellen puts in aye, your name changes to green, and there's a Y that then will appear by your name. If Senator Salazar is a no vote, after the no vote his no vote is lodged, his name turns to red with an N next to it immediately. And then if Senator Guru is a conflict, his, I think, is blue. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe yellow. But anyways, it turns a different color just for conflict, and then a C for conflict is next to his name. If Senator Rothfuss is absent or excused, then his name turns a different color, and then an E for excused or an A for absent comes up. And then all that is in real time. There's also a banner that the vote is open. So if somebody takes a screenshot of it, it's not the final vote. The chief clerk still announces, are there any changes? Are there any changes? People can get up and change their vote until the vote is closed, just normal voting procedure. And then we close that after the vote is closed. That then goes away. There's no permanent record of that except on what your vote is in the digest then for that Senate file. So that's what we've got right now, 4 recorded votes. I would say one feature of these amendments in both the House and the Senate, because the House considered one as well, is that it expands the number of recorded votes to everything except for these 6 motions that are listed out in proposed rule 12-13D. So every motion before the Senate, except for the motion to adjourn, recess, to re-refer, or recommit a bill, for the committee of the whole to rise and report, the previous question, and the motion to withdraw. And, you know, the way this is structured right now, for every motion, you have 1 minute then to vote through electronic voting. The only exception is for the consent list, that, you know, everybody gets up and votes aye, and then if you want to change the consent list, there's going to be a 30-second reconsideration vote for the consent list, and the same for committee bills on the introductory vote during the budget session, and that's Senate Rule 13-5B. So that's kind of real high level of that. I think one of the reasons that, probably there's multiple reasons why, but also to show you that if that bill was to go into effect, here's kind of the corresponding rule changes that would be needed with it.
So Director, just to kind of step back a little bit from these rules in particular, for those of us new to Rules Committee, can you tell us how this particular proposed rule came before us today?
Yes. So, Madam Chairman, how this came before you today is, Senator Larson requested for these to be here for you to consider sponsoring. Now, you can sponsor it, not sponsor it. It's your prerogative. Senator Larson then, or another senator could still bring these to the floor of the Senate for consideration whenever the final rules of the 68th Senate are considered.
All right, back to discussion on the proposed rule. Any questions about this? So for example, we would have to, on committee of the whole today that we had, there was a bill that was discussed, let's get it into second reading so it can be amended. But there'd now be this recorded vote of individuals who maybe didn't support the proposed bill, but were looking forward to seeing the amendments the second day. So that vote can be used against them, and they then have to explain that to the 50,000 organizations that claim to be tracking legislators' voting records. And then the second day it could be amended, and that vote is then going to have a green light or a red light, and everyone has seconds to vote. Is that what we're doing here? Every single vote that we take is going to be recorded for the 50,000 entities that are trying to make money off our voting records?
Madam Chairman, the proposed rules, yes, very much increase the number of recorded votes that would be taken in the Wyoming Senate and correspondingly in the Wyoming House of Representatives.
So Director, I'm just going to signal now that I'm a no vote for the reason that our voting records are misused and misrepresented and misapplied. And the increased ability to do that, I think, is bad for the public and actually does not provide greater transparency. I'm a solid no.
Question for, actually for our chief clerk. Sorry. Thank you.
Clerk, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
You bet.
I just have a hunch that you know this. How long does it take you to read the roll call?
It's under a minute,
Okay.
generally. I haven't timed it in a while with the new names. I'm still getting a cadence with those, so.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Just wondered. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I did not go back to last year and watch any of the Senate debate and then time Ellen to how long she took, but I did time Katie Talbot in the House. And Katie's about between a minute and a half and 2 minutes and 15 seconds on calling 62. And it really, you can just tell if it's everybody's voting one way, she really gets in a rhythm. And then if people vote different ways, it just takes longer.
Further discussion? Senator Larson, you want to come forward? If anybody mentions transparency.
Madam Chairman, obviously, I've been interested in this for a long time. I think a push-button voting system would be a good way to go. I did have some amendments if we went any further with this to try to knock some time down. I did have some amendments that in committee of the whole, I don't think we should do that. I think we ought to have our aye and no votes, unless there's a division called and instead of standing up, you just push the button. I did visit with the chief clerk, maybe we could knock down quite a few of those votes, like 15 seconds on the reconsideration on, third reading consent list or such. So, I think it's just something to open our eyes up. I think it would help out. But obviously, a lot of people like to say or aye and no and all that. But we don't have to do that this year. If that bill comes through and we do pass HB 158, then we kind of have an idea what we might do. I just want to keep it in everybody's vision that I would like to have a push-button voting system.
Thank you. And thanks for, I know this idea has been floating around. I know you've had it for a long time, so I appreciate the fact that you brought it. But I have a question. We just got an explanation on how our voting system works right now, and that it is transparent, real time, yes, no, here, absent, whatever, conflict, all comes up in real time. So what difference does your bill bring that makes that better? In your mind, what is doing it this way? What do you think would change, or what do you think what's the benefit, I guess? In your mind, what's the benefit of doing this?
Senator Grew, I'm just preparing, if we do get that other bill to pass, I really want to see what this other one looks like. In discussion, we had a view of it on when we were doing the tech and committee, can't remember what we call it, but and I thought it looked pretty neat. I'm glad it's going to be up there and available. So yeah, I don't think there's any advantage. I definitely want to see what happens with what we have coming up.
Just a comment. My biggest fear about this is, really honest, the biggest fear that I have about this is that groups of people who may have one political persuasion or another will meet in a room somewhere and will run to the floor when the vote comes, hit a button and walk right back out the door. So we stand a chance of losing listening to debate and listen, because then you're just going to walk in and hit a button and walk out the door, which if you've ever been to Washington, is exactly what they do. They don't listen to each other, they don't talk to each other, they run in, hit a button and walk right out the door. And I think they lose something from that. And I would really hate to see even incrementally that we start heading down that road. I'm not saying that's anyone's intention. I'm just saying today I can see it at lunch. When I got to the Senate, we all sat together at lunch every single day. Now there are groups of people who don't come in and they leave. I miss that. I feel we're missing something. And so I worry that this, personally, the way the system's laid out, if I vote yes the first time and then it gets amended and I switch to a no, and the third day I didn't make it because I had to go somewhere, I'm left wide open at my next election that someone could take any one of those 3 votes and say, oh, can you believe what that son of a gun did? Yes, no, and left. That's something we all have to deal with, and it happens to us all the time. It happens, people misconstrue what vote we take 1 minute to the next because of changes. Or the old famous, I voted yes before I voted no. But that part is just part of life. But that's, to me, that's the biggest fear of the could-be consequence of this. But thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Larson, and we've been talking about this for a number of years, but one of the questions that I've always had is, we do have other legislatures around the country that do this. And when I look at their behavior, I don't think, wow, we need to act more like the Texas legislature, where they do ghost voting, right? You've got, and this is on YouTube, I'm not making claims of, you've just got a legislator that when it's time to vote, votes at his desk, spins around, votes at Guru's desk, and I've got 5 other votes that I have to do. That's on YouTube. It's commonplace. It's just the standard accepted practice. Nobody even blinks at it at this point in time. So getting back to the idea of, how many senators do you need on the floor, maybe about 2 at that point, right? the ones that are going to vote aye and the ones that are going to vote no, as long as everybody knows, then you can just kind of take care of business. So the question I have is, what are we trying to emulate from another state where we look to the other state and we think, boy, they do it better than we do it? Because it seems to me that our practices in Wyoming are a source of pride, where I still think that we've got the best legislature from a practice standpoint, from how we do it, quality of institution. And I keep looking at others and I'm never convinced that anyone's doing it better than we are. So as we look at this, and I know that you've been a proponent of this technology for a number of years and probably supporting that legislation, who are we seeing out there that's just so much better than the state of Wyoming that we need to do what they're doing?
I don't know how to answer that.
Okay.
Definitely, we're going to have some protection in there if we did go that direction. Obviously, it's, either you're going to see your face like you do on the iPad or whatever. But yeah, I agree with you. We want to be, our senators and legislators to be in the chambers and not dilly-dallying out somewhere and somebody else voting for them. So yeah,
Okay,
I
thank
don't know
you.
what to say there. But thanks.
So just kind of adding to the conversation, there was a particular vote that I was going back and looking at. I said, I don't recall voting that way. And it caused me great hesitation. And so I actually went back and found it on YouTube and saw myself verbally voting a certain way, right? I mean, irrefutable, because there I am voting. And the chief clerk is calling out my name. And my voice responds. That, I think, is actually more transparent and so much more powerful than potentially seeing a green light next to my name on a billboard. I do think that with all the other technology that we have going on, right, with YouTube and the live stream, the live recording of our votes on the website, that I'm not sure that this practice that other legislators took up a long time ago, which I do think helped provide transparency to how people voted, is consistent with where we are today with technology. I appreciate the effort, I do, and clearly I get frustrated with how votes get manipulated. But yeah, I do, I appreciate the effort We'll keep considering it, keep thinking about it. I think Senator Rothfuss's question is correct of who really is doing it better.
Madam Chair?
Can I
Senator.
answer
Well,
that?
no, go ahead and answer.
Madam
this.
Chairwoman,
Senator?
I think the average citizen that doesn't look at the Wild Ledge webpage and tries to go through that, or even on YouTube, it takes a lot of time. So I think a lot of this is probably to help those that don't know how to manipulate that. And, you know, to go to the webpage, it is kind of difficult if you don't know how to do it. So that would be my response. I would hope it helps people to see it quicker and not have to know how to go about it. Anyway.
Thank you, Senator.
Madam Chairman, members of the Rules Committee, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. What you see before you is a potential amendment to Senate Rule 2-8. 2-8 is about, a current rule is about changes to committee membership. As we would recall, this was something that we dealt with in the last legislature when a committee appointment chairmanship was changed during the interim, and then that was reviewed by the body, et cetera. And I bring this to you, I guess, from a perspective, and the former president of the Senate is not here, so I'm not going to speak on his behalf, but I bring you this as a former presiding officer from the House of Representatives. And there were times, and it occurred, Matt will probably have to, at least once and maybe twice with several members, where there just had to be a change. Now, the House rules did not speak to it, and so it was implied that the speaker still retained complete control over the membership and the chairmanship of the body. The Senate has a specific rule, the current Rule 2.8, that prohibits any changes unless after the initial appointments, and unless the body takes action. Well, as you know, the body is only together in session for 40 days one year and 20 days the next, and then we are working in multiple settings with multiple committees, some senators serving on 5 or 6 different committees, maybe having, do the math, if you have 6 committee days in an interim and have 4 committees, you might have a month's worth of work in the interim. For some folks, they have a significant investment in time. Well, what the presiding officer in the Senate does not have is an ability for any reason to change, replace any member for a good cause or ungood cause. Now, my point is, I don't want it to be used for an undue purpose, but if you have a death on a committee that is, of a value, you want to be able to replace that member. Now, that is a vacancy that maybe we can imply that they could do something with. Maybe you can. But if you have illness, or if you have a circumstance, which I did as a presiding officer, where there was conflict within a committee and the members of the committee, including threats of violence, intimidation, et cetera, then there is an obligation, I think, for the presiding officer to provide or be able to have the tools to keep members safe in carrying out their duties. So I think this is a clarification. I think this is a process that we need to at least consider, allowing some level of discretion. And this is not left, the way the rule is drafted, to the president. This is the president taking this to the 5 members, including themselves, there are the 4 other colleagues who are all part of the elected members because of either their duty, i.e. the president, the vice president, the majority floor leader, the minority floor leader, and then that 5th elected person to management council. And the way this is drafted, it would require 2/3 of those members to affirm the request of the president in the interim, nothing changes during the session. The session, it still goes to the body and it's a majority of the body. But with this potential proposal, with this potential adoption, it would say the Senate president could go to the Senate members of Management Council and say, this is my concern, this is what is occurring, this is, et cetera. Will you affirm or support this decision? 2/3 of 5 members is 4 members. You could go to unanimous if you chose to and just say, look, this has to be so egregious that it takes a unanimous vote. And the reason you would do that is for the minority party protection, when you have 4 members and 1 potentially, as we have now. So I just bring it forth as something that I believe it's a practical necessity as a former presiding officer who dealt with circumstances that with this rule in place, a presiding officer in the position I was in would have not been able to make necessary adjustments for the functioning of the legislative bodies, committees in the interim, and the safety of members. Now, I think there's other reasons it could be used potentially, et cetera, but that was the reason I believe this is personally imperative from my own experience. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll be glad to stand for any questions.
For the senator.